Welcome to this walk along Albury's first CBD. We will start at the corner of Townsend and Hume Streets and travel north along Townsend Street before exploring the western end of Dean Street. But why start at this corner? In late 1838, colonial surveyor Thomas Townsend surveyed the location referred to by local Wiradjuri people as Bungambra Watha and by European pioneers as the crossing place. Townsend drew up a plan of a new town with just 3 streets running from south to north: Wodonga Place, Townsend Street and Kiewa Street. There were 4 streets running west to east: Hume Street, Hovell Street, Ebden Street and Nuragong Street. His plan was submitted to colonial authorities, and in February 1839 the new township of Albury was gazetted. It's logical to assume that Townsend imagined that the main street of the new village would be the one bearing his name. Being on the floodplain, all of the original Albury township was subject to frequent flooding. This photo was taken during the devastating floods of 1917, by which time most business activity had already moved north and east from the floodplain. Housing, business and socialising venues were established on the floodplain. 10 years later, in 1848, Townsend added Smollett, Dean and Swift Streets, heading west to east, and Olive and David Streets, heading south to north. We are now looking at a view of Albury taken from Western Hill in about 1888. The view clearly indicates early business activity on Townsend Street, between Smollett Street, the left-hand arrow, and Hume Street, the right-hand arrow. On the corner of Smollett and Townsend Streets is the Exchange Hotel. That's the one with the striped veranda just visible. And just to the west of this, along Smollett Street, is the Exchange Hotel Stables, still standing in 2025 as an apartment block. The only other building still standing is Thomas Mate's store on the corner of Hume and Townsend Streets, the right-hand arrow. I will talk more about these buildings later. We will start the tour with a quick look at the corner of Hume and Townsend Streets as it is in March 2025. The building on the southeast corner, where the tyre service is in 2025, started in about 1850 as Solomon's Auction Rooms. This photo shows the building as it appeared during the 1917 floods in South Albury. In 1858, Flora McEachran leased the premises and converted it to become the Gold Diggers Hotel. It was one of many hotels along Townsend Street, which was part of the main Sydney to Melbourne road, travelling the length of the street. In July 1859, Thomas Field took over, changing the name of the hotel to the Horse and Jockey Hotel. The hotel remained in business until 1867, and not long after it became the premises of Albury's Customs House. Pioneering retailer Thomas Hodges Mate established his retail store on the southwest corner in 1850, and by the early 1850s, the corner had become the centre of town. Mate's store also included Albury's post office. At this stage, Albury had a population of just over 400. The first paddle steamer to reach Albury arrived in October 1855, and Mate's store was ideally located to take advantage of river traffic. By 1856, Albury's population was 645. In 1884, Mates opened this substantial two-storey building to handle the increased business. The retail business moved to the corner of Dean and Kiewa Streets in 1899. The Royal Hotel on the northwest corner was built by William Wise, and in 1850 James Layton became the first licensee. The hotel was described as built substantially of brick, containing a convenient bar, dining rooms, parlour and 12 bedrooms. The second photo shows the hotel in 1959, not long before it was demolished. Next to the Royal Hotel, heading north, was the office of the Albury Border Post, Albury's first newspaper, which started under George Mott in October 1856. Just north of the Royal Hotel was a coach building business of James Higgins, established in the 1870s. In March 1885, his first factory burnt down and was replaced by this building. In 2025, the building is the home of the Elm Court Motel. At its peak, the coach factory employed over 50 workers. James died in 1919 and his son Ignatius Higgins took over the business. We move on now to look at the intersection of Townsend and Smollett Streets, starting with the northwest corner, then northeast, southeast and finally southwest corners. Just up from the northwest corner is the beautiful Kiora building. After the hotels, it was the first major commercial building in Albury. It opened its doors as Albury's first bank, the Bank of New South Wales, on June 1, 1857. Just to the right of the bank building is a wall of the Imperial Hotel. A major fire destroyed the Imperial in August 1879, spreading to the bank and completely gutting it, but leaving the walls intact. The bank moved to Dean Street, and since then the building has been a residence, a stock and station agency, a music academy, part of the New South Wales Health Service, and a private residence once again. North of Kiora was the Australian Hotel at 481 Townsend Street. It was opened by J.P. Barrington in June 1878. From 1899, Thomas Whitewick was a licensee. He is in the centre of the photo, taken in about 1910. With a splendid balcony, upstairs the hotel contained 5 bedrooms, dining and sitting rooms. Downstairs was the bar, dining rooms, kitchen and 3 bedrooms. In 1922, the Licences Reduction Board decided that Albury had too many hotel licences and 4 hotels were delicensed and closed their doors as hotels. The Australian Hotel, this one, the Golden Fleece Hotel in David Street, the Salutation Hotel in Dean Street, and the Union Bridge Hotel in Wodonga Place. On the northeast corner of Smollett and Townsend Streets was the Gloucester Hotel. The building was originally the Commercial Banking Company of Sydney, built by William Jones in 1859. In the early 1890s, the CBC Bank moved to Dean Street, and in 1893 their old premises became the Criterion Hotel. The hotel was renamed the Gloucester in 1935, perhaps to recognise the Australian visit of the Duke of Gloucester in February of that year. The building was demolished in October 1984 to make way for Kmart and the West End shopping complex. North of the Gloucester was the Pastoral Hotel, opened in November 1938 for James Cox and the Water Street family. Charles Water Street had died just before the Pastoral Hotel opened its doors. The Pastoral was the second hotel to be demolished in 1984 to make way for Kmart and the West End shopping complex. Between the Gloucester and the future site of the Pastoral was the Border City Hotel. William Mangan was granted a licence for the hotel in 1876 in a two-storey building previously known as the Border City Store. There were several licences before the hotel licence passed to James Cox and Charles Water Street in 1933. They built the Pastoral Hotel on a block of land just north of the Border City Hotel. The old hotel's licence was transferred to the Pastoral when it opened for business in November 1938. Originally the single-storey squatters' hotel, the Exchange Hotel was on the southeast corner of Smollett and Townsend Streets. The hotel was taken over by Adam Kidd and William Brickell, adding the second storey and renaming the hotel the Exchange. Brickell and Kidd had arrived in Australia from San Francisco in 1852, seeking a fortune from gold at Yakandanda. They soon established as businessmen in Albury. Amongst many other money-making ventures, Brickell and Kidd won the contract to build Albury's first Union Bridge, opened in 1861, and they had a large produce store just south of the Exchange Hotel. Perhaps their most lucrative business was as licensees of the ferries or punts, which were the only means of safely crossing the Murrumbidgee River at Wagga and the Murray River at Albury. Major extensions to the hotel included a third storey, balconies, and the Albury Telegraph noted that the new proprietors have come out in a style somewhat new for Albury. The furniture and decorations have been got up regardless of expense, everything in the style of a crack Melbourne house. The hotel became the centre of social life in Albury, with a theatre being added to the Exchange, Albury's first theatre. It could seat 400 patrons, enough to accommodate about 2/3 of Albury's population. It was the venue for productions for local theatre and music groups for several years before the Mechanics' Institute became available. Sadly, in January 1879, a fire started in the Smollett Street premises of Higgins and Baker, coach builders. The fire quickly spread, destroying the Exchange Theatre. The Albury Banner reported losses of several £1,000s. The furniture alone in the Exchange Hotel cost £2,500. The Banner also commented that during the fire, the cellar was rushed by a crowd who had done nothing to stay the progress of flames, and the liquor stolen wholesale. To give one example, 60 bottles of case whisky of the most expensive brand were taken away bodily, while champagne, wine, brandy, etc. were removed in an equally wholesale manner. The hotel also provided stabling in a two-storey building that survives in 2025 in Smollett Street, west of Townsend Street, now converted for accommodation. William Brickell married Albury girl Mary Bulmer before returning to America, where he used the wealth he had earned in Albury to buy up land in Florida. That land was developed, and Brickell is now considered the founder of the city of Miami in Florida. It is probably fair to say that Albury money financed the birth of Miami. The Brickell name is well remembered in Miami, with a major street, the CBD, both recalling the family name, and this is a photo of Brickell Key, a very affluent part of the city of Miami. After Brickell and Kidd returned to America in 1862, the new lessee was Lewis Jones. Mail and coach lines had operated for several years from the hotel. Jones was, for many years, the booking agent for Cobb & Co., for Crawford's, and for Connolly and Company's coaches. The Exchange Hotel closed in 1884 and the building was converted to a store. It was demolished in 1933 and the site became part of Farmers and Grazier's wool stores. And after many years, it became the Australian Tax Office, and in 2025, Quest Apartments occupy part of the site. We move now to the southwest corner of Smollett and Townsend streets. Several businesses occupied this block in the early days, including a pharmacist and later a bootmaker. Alfred and Ellen Waugh moved to Albury in the 1890s, and in the late 1890s, Alf Waugh started his own butcher shop on this corner. It was the first in Albury to have an electric refrigerator. Alf was invalided in 1915, and for the next 30 years, Ellen continued the business. Both Waughs were very active in local organisations. Alf became Mayor of Albury, and he served 19 mayoral terms from 1905 to 1938. The Waughs sold their butchery in 1944 and purchased Kiora, just a short walking distance along Townsend Street, and this became their retirement home. Several other butchers occupied the store. In 2025, it operates as a restaurant. Alf Waugh is remembered with a drinking fountain in Curie 2 Square. We look now at the intersection of Townsend Street with Dean Street. As early residents and business moved north to avoid the frequent flooding, Dean Street started to take over as Albury's main street. Until the early 20th century, this end of Dean Street had mixed use. There was light industrial, for example flour mills and blacksmiths. There was retail, for example the Beehive building. There was hospitality, for example the Albury Club Hotel. And there was residential use. Until 1962, it was at this corner that the Hume Highway turned from Dean Street into Townsend Street. Note the sign directing traffic to Melbourne in the yellow circle. It is worth noting that it was close to this intersection that the Bungambrewatha Creek crossed Dean Street after meandering under the present site of the Commercial Club and Elizabeth Street. Until 1863, when the first bridge across the creek was built in Dean Street, crossing the creek could be quite hazardous in times of high flow. That first bridge only survived until 1870, when a flood washed it away. A decision was then made to divert the creek to run beside the street that we now know as Creek Street and cross Dean Street near the Gardens Reserve. The original river course is indicated on the map in blue. The new course is indicated in orange. On the southeast corner of Dean and Townsend Streets was the Fanny Sarah's flour mill. It was where the Beehive building is today. The mill was built for James Maclaurin in 1851 and named Fanny for Fanny Brown, daughter of Albury's first European settler, Robert Brown, and Ceres after the Roman goddess of corn. Ownership of the mill passed to George Day in 1861 and then to James Hayes in 1874, before the mill closed in 1887 when Hayes opened his new mill on the western side of Townsend Street, about 2 doors down from Dean Street. We will return shortly to the Hayes mill. The Beehive building was built in 1889 for stock and station agent Charles Griffith. There have been many tenants in the building, including a saddler, a shoe shop, a chemist, a tailor, a sports store, and a dress shop. In the latter decades of the 20th century, the principal tenant was Moy's Shoe Store. Returning now to Hayes Flour Mill, that had been rebuilt on the western side of Townsend Street, 2 doors down from the store on the corner of Dean Street. In January 1899, a boiler exploded at the mill. Many locals thought an earthquake had occurred, others that a powder magazine had exploded. The force of the explosion blew shrapnel in all directions. Tragically, 11-year-old Francis New, who was having breakfast in the kitchen of his home in Dean Street, was hit by part of the boiler and killed instantly. Townsend Motors established on the site in 1925 and operated there until purchased by Preston Motors in 1939. In 2025, a furniture store occupies the site. On the block next to the corner on the same side of Townsend Street was the produce store of Henry Jacobs. Jacobs arrived from Germany in about 1859. He purchased the site of his store in November 1871, and in October 1881, Jacobs was advertising the cheapest house in town for groceries, horse feed, and colonial produce of all kinds. Henry Jacobs died in 1917, and the business passed to his sons, William and Norman. William's son, also William, took over the business in 1947. The site is occupied by a restaurant in 2025. The southwest corner was for many years a furniture store. It was established in 1873 by William John Jones, known as Coffin Jones, as he was also an undertaker. The McClure brothers, grocers, ironmongers, timber merchants, and furniture warehousing, occupied the building in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Abe Nathan purchased the business in 1909, and the corner became known as Nathan's Corner. His store burnt down in 1910 and was replaced the following year by the building that still survives on the site. The store was purchased by Maples in 1923. In this photo you can also see Jacob's produce store, 1 door down in Townsend Street. Maples continued to trade at the site until the company was purchased by Clark Rubber in 1986. In 2005, the corner portion of the building is occupied by Drummond Golf. The Albury Club Hotel, established in 1875 across the road. For a short time, the members of the Albury Club met in the hotel. The Club Hotel was renovated and extended to resemble an old English tavern in 1938-39 and was renamed the Carlton Hotel. The hotel was demolished in about 1970 to make way for the Travelodge. After several name changes, in 2025 the hotel is known as Atura. A quick look now further west on Dean Street. In 1934, the site on the northeast corner of Albury District Hospital grounds became available for Albury's first dedicated ambulance station. The building was designed by prominent local architect Lewis Harrison and opened in December 1934. Beyond the ambulance station was the building that housed nurses at Albury District Hospital. The nurses' new home was built in 1937 and officially opened by the New South Wales Minister for Health in November 1937. Well before the Albury Hospital opened in February 1918 on Wodonga Place, the corner of Dean Street and Wodonga Place was the home of the Hume flour mill of John Burroughs. Burroughs advertised in the Albury Banner in January 1871 that John Burroughs, having erected the Hume flour mills with all the latest improvements, hopes by strict attention to business to merit a fair share of support. The mill continued at the site for about 40 years, but being too far from the railway station, John Burroughs' son, Percy Burroughs, demolished the Dean Street mill in 1909-1910 and moved the Hume flour mill to Young Street. We will now turn our attention to Dean Street, heading east towards Kiewa Street, and highlight some sites on the northern side of the street. In 2025, the commercial club extends from Elizabeth Street to about a third of the way to Kiewa Street. On the Elizabeth Street corner was Delamonte Chambers. They were occupied over time by a number of different tenants, including the Albury Business College on the top floor and a car dealership on the ground floor. Next door was Jack Roos. He had a blacksmith shop. The Rural Bank of New South Wales opened on this site in January 1938. Next door was a saddlery of William Davidson. Before some of these businesses established, John McEachran's blacksmith shop operated facing Townsend Street from about 1870. He died in 1923, and the Albury Banner's obituary included this tribute. Mr. McEachran was probably the best loved man in the Albury district, a pioneer who enjoyed the respect of everybody. For over 63 years, he had been a resident of Albury, where he conducted a shoeing forge very successfully. McEachran was an uncle of world-famous bass singer Malcolm McEachran. Next, we move a little further east. We pick up the tour where the Salutation Hotel served patrons from 1870. The hotel was delicensed in 1922. The building was purchased by the Commercial Club in October 1934 and demolished in May 1935 to make way for the Wool Exchange, which opened later that year. Albury newspaper, the Albury Daily News, closed in 1924, and the National Bank built on the site, opening in December 1926. The National Bank moved further east to these premises in November 1937. The Border Morning Mail had been published from 1903. In February 1912, the paper moved to this site, building a two-storey office at front with a single-storey printing works behind. In 1963, the Border Mail moved to the recently purchased former home of Murray Valley Coaches in Swift Street. The building on the right is the Commonwealth Bank. The bank purchased this site from Dr. Cleaver Woods and opened here in January 1930. We will go back now to the Townsend Street corner and look at some changes on the south side of Dean Street. Temple Court was designed by Gordon and Gordon and erected in 1885. Businesses at Temple Court included Lewis Harrison, architect, Valentine Flood Nagel, solicitor, photographic studios of David Bennett and later Charles Graham Salmon, and dentists G.D. Kenner and later on Tom Moore. After the 1879 fire that gutted the Bank of New South Wales in Townsend Street, the bank, recognising that Dean Street was a more suitable main street than Townsend Street, purchased George Day's Dean Street house in April 1881 and converted it to a bank and a manager's residence. That's the Grand House back from the street in this photograph. In June 1899, a new building was constructed fronting Dean Street. That's the building on the right-hand side fronting the street. That building in turn was demolished to make way for the present building, which opened in May of 1938. What started as the Bank of New South Wales merged with the Commercial Bank of Australia much later to become Westpac. This is Anzac House. In 1906, the club leased rooms in George Day's former house, which we have just looked at, after the Bank of New South Wales had built their new premises a few years earlier. In September 1926, these new club premises in front of the Day home were opened. The club sold these premises in 1936 and moved to the north side of Dean Street. This building then became Anzac House. The Bank of Australasia opened as a single-storey building on this site in 1877. A second storey was added in the mid-1920s. The bank became the ANZ Bank in 1950, and this branch closed in 1992 and transferred to a new branch further down Dean Street. The first hotel on this site opened as the Albury Hotel of Charles Schmidt, moving into the site of William Jones's new furniture warehouse in October of 1873. Schmidt moved a couple of doors up in 1876 to the new Albury Hotel. The new licensee renamed this hotel Tattersalls. In the early 1880s, Tattersalls was renamed the Albion Hotel. On screen is a photo of the Albion as it appeared in a peace march in 1919, celebrating the end of World War I. The original Albion was demolished in late 1940 to be replaced in 1941 by the familiar three-storied hotel we have today. The Coles store, on the right of this photo, was their first Albury store. It opened in 1936. The site was formerly occupied by Kenneth McClelland's drapery store, which had operated there since the 1800s. After Coles moved further east in Dean Street, Moran and Cato occupied this store. Next is Hume House, with the Hume Weir Cafe on the ground floor, moving here from further east in Dean Street in December 1939. Upstairs, Hume House provided accommodation. Formerly, the site of Hume House was occupied by the Albury Hotel. It was opened by Charles Schmidt in November 1876. Within 12 months, new rooms were added to cater for the Albury Club, which had selected the hotel as its new home. They moved to their own premises in 1883. In July 1939, the Albury Hotel licence was transferred to the new Albury Hotel just around the corner in Keywa Street. We finish with a couple of photos looking west. The photo comes from about 1908, probably taken from the veranda of the Albury Hotel. The hotel on the left is the Albion. On show are the business premises on the northern side of Dean Street. Note the lady riding her bicycle in the middle of the street. The final photo is taken from the veranda of the Lands Office and shows business premises on the southern side of Dean Street. The bank on the corner is the Commercial Banking Company of Sydney. This was formerly the premises of the Australian Joint Stock Bank. Then Cannon's Albury Hotel, McLennan's Drapery Store, then on down to Maples on the Townsend Street corner.